advocate at Microsoft. Let's get started. First of all, let's talk about a little bit more about Prisma. So what is Prisma? Prisma is an open source ORM that allows you to easily manage, interact with your database. So Prisma takes a different approach to ORMs compared to traditional ORMs. It uses a custom schema definition language that automatically writes migrations and generates type-safe code. So as we can see in this image, the server is our backend. Here, the backend inside in the code, we will use the Prisma to connect with our database through the client. And finally, when the database migration is generated, this information will be sent to the client side, in this case, in the front end side. So, what is the benefits to use Prisma? So why should we use Prisma? So there's a lot of good benefits. One of them is server side with a database. So this is the main use case for Prisma. Server-side applications typically are API servers that expose data operations via technologies like REST, GraphQL, or even gRPC. They are commonly built as a microservices or monolithic apps and deployed via long-running servers or serverless functions, for example. So Prisma is a great fit for all of these application and deployment models. So at the moment, Prisma has a lot of support for several relational databases. And during this talk, we will use the Azure SQL Server. Another good point about to use Prisma about the productivity. So the productivity and developer experience are core to how we are building our tools. So we are looking to build developer-friendly abstractions for tasks that are complex, error-prone, and time-consuming when performed manually. The declarative Prisma schema provides us as a overview of the current state of the database that's easy to understand for everyone. So this is a major improvement to traditional workflows where developers have to dig through migration files to understand the current table structure. Another good point is also you want a tool that holistically covers your database workflow. So Prisma is a lot more than just another ORM. So you can use a database toolkit that covers the daily workflows of application developers that interact with databases. Another good point about to use Prisma is the only fully type-safe ORM in the TypeScript ecosystem. So the generated Prisma client ensures typed query results even for partial queries or relations. And finally, Prisma is an open source tool and is happening in the open source development. So everyone here, if you want to see with a transparent development process, proper maintenance and support, everyone here can see in the GitHub repository and Prisma GitHub repository. So now let's go and talk about some of the main three concepts about Prisma. So the first one is Prisma Client. So Prisma Client, it allows us to access the database through plain JavaScript methods and objects without having to write the query in the database language itself. So in short, it acts as an abstraction in front of the database. So it's pretty easier to write CRUD applications using Prisma. Another good key concept about Prisma is Prisma Migrate. So Prisma Migrate is a powerful database schema migration tool. So it uses declarative data modeling syntax to describe your database schema. So it also stores our entire migration history and easily let us revert and replay migrations. It also allows us to run before and after hooks to execute scripts while migrating, so we can populate the database with required values during migration. And the last one is Prisma Studio. So Prisma Studio is a kind of modern UI to view and edit data. So you can perform even the CRUD operations around to your data using Prisma Studio. So this is the easiest way to visualize data from our database as well as manipulate it. Now let's go into talk about a little bit more about Azure SQL. So firstly, what is Azure SQL? So Azure SQL database is a relational database as service and hosted in Azure that falls into the industry category of platform as service. So with the SQL Server, you can use built-in features and functionality that requires extensive configuration, even on premises or in an Azure virtual machine. So when we use SQL database, you pay as you go with options to scale up or out for greater power with no interruption. So with SQL database has some additional features that are not available with SQL Server, for example, such as built-in high availability, intelligence, and management. But the good thing around to the Azure SQL database that offers the following deployment options. The first one is single database. As a single database with its own set of resources managed by a logical SQL Server. So a single database is similar to contained database in SQL Server. With this option is optimized for modern application development of new cloud-born applications. So inside the SQL database, you can use another two other options is available as well, the hyperscale or serverless. Another good option here for Azure SQL database is Elasticable, which is a collection of databases with a shared set of resources managed by your logical SQL Server. So, for example, if single databases can be moved into and out of Elasticable, so once you want to move your single database, you can move and out, you can use this option, so the Elasticable. So this option is optimized for modern application development of new cloud-born applications using the multi-tenant SaaS application pattern. So that's why the Elasticables provide a cost-effective solution for managing the performance of multiple databases that have a variable SAGE patterns. So now let's discuss a little bit more why we should use Azure SQL. What is the benefits around to use Azure SQL? One of them is Azure SQL is fully managed SQL database, automated updates, provisionizing, and backup, so you can focus just only in application development. So Microsoft handles all patching, updating of the SQL, operating system code, so you don't have to manage the underlying infrastructure. Another good benefit around to the Azure SQL is flexible and responsive serverless compute and hyperscale storage rapidly adapt to your changing requirements. Also, layers of protection, building controls, intelligent threat detection keep your data very secure. Also, building in artificial intelligence and high availability maintain peak performance and durability with SLA of up to 95%, for example. This is the other, for me, the best benefits to use Azure SQL, because the Azure SQL database is based on the latest stable version of the Microsoft SQL Server database engine. So you can use advanced query processing features such as high performance in memory technologies and intelligent query processing. So in fact, the newest capabilities of SQL Server are released first to SQL database and then to SQL Server itself. So you get the newest SQL Server capabilities with no overhead for patching or upgrading tested across millions of databases. And advanced data security, which you can enable cryptographic verification, remediate protection threats in real time with intelligent threat protection, and protect your data with always encrypted technology. So there's many other benefits to using Azure SQL. So if you want to know more information after this talk, you can see this link in this video description. So after discussing about all the good benefits to use Prisma and Azure SQL, so we can see that is the perfect combination. But why? Because developers working with relational databases face ongoing challenge. How do you ensure that your application code aligns with your database schema throughout the development cycle? So these are particularly challenging when you are interactively involving both the application database schema to deliver new features and bug fixes. For example, data modeling, schema migrations, and writing database queries are common tasks application developers deal with every day. So the Prisma team found that the Node.js ecosystem, while becoming increasingly popular to build database backend applications, doesn't provide modern tools for application developers to deal with these kind of tasks. So even though there are many existing ORMs, developers still face the challenges of confidently deploying code changes that interact with the database, especially without tooling to statically verify code changes and database schema changes in turn. So because of this, in September 2021, the Prisma team, together with the Azure SQL product team, made available the general available version to support the use of Prisma and Azure SQL. So Prisma is a next generation ORM for Node.js in TypeScript that eliminates many of these problems and makes you more confident when building data-intensive backends. It can be used as an alternative to traditional ORMs and SQL query builders to read and write data to your database. So that's why during our demonstration, we are going to use a full stack application using Azure SQL with Azure Functions and Prisma. During this demo, I will be focused just only in the backend side. How easier is to use Prisma, Azure SQL, and Azure Functions. I will not focus how to create these databases in the Azure portal. I just will focus just only one in the coding stuff. So talk shit, let's coding. As I said, all of you here, we are going to focus just only in the backend side, just only using how to use actually Azure SQL with Azure Functions and Prisma. But let me show the client side, because in the client side, I'm using Vue.js. So here in the client side, inside the source folder and the service folder and the API JS, I have a different calls here. One, in the line 19, actually this application is already deployed using Azure Static Web App. So if you want to see this application running in the web, I can show you all of you here after this demonstration. Here in the line 16, I'm just using the Azure Functions URL, which is the localhost 7071/API. To call our backend side that we are creating right now. During this demonstration, I just recreating the post att verb in the backend side. So let's focus in just that. So here in the API folder, we already have a few files. One of them is this shared folder, which we have two different files here, error.js, to deal with the different status message errors. And here I'm calling the Prisma Client because I already installed Prisma Client, the Prisma, and also the Azure Functions package here. So now, just to show all of you here, I already created in the Azure portal the Azure SQL Prisma Server. So inside in the Azure Prisma Server, which is I chose the single database, I created SQL databases, two SQL databases. One is an Azure SQL Prisma Shadow database. The Shadow database is a kind of development database for Prisma, and this one an Azure SQL Prisma database. So in the behind the scenes, if you use here the option query editor, is a preview here. So I'll include here my password here. And if we run, for example, this query, we will see we don't have any data information here. So let's creating the first function here, which will be the create employee. Okay, and again, if you want to see this deployed application, you can access the GitHub repository related with the stock presentation. I deployed this application using Azure Static Web Apps. So if you want to test it out, it's already deployed. Okay, so let's back to the code. So here I will use the Azure Functions extension. For this, let's click on in this option here. Here in the Functions option, I will include my Azure subscription and I will create my first function. So in this case, I will click in this create function. I will choose this option, HTTP trigger. I will include, provide a function name. In this case, I will include create employee. Here I will choose the option anonymous. And if we back to the code, we will see a folder called create employee. And inside in this folder, we have three different files, function.json, index.js, and sample.date. We can remove this file, but before to coding a logical to create a new employee, we have to create the model, the employee model, and migrate this model. So how to do this? So the first step that we need to do here is to install our data source provider. In this case, we are going to use SQL Server. So let's open our prompt command and type inside in the API folder the command So after to type this command, if we come back to the Visual Studio Code, we will see a new folder called Prisma. And inside in this Prisma folder, we do have a file called schema.prisma. Inside in this schema.prisma, we have to create our employee model. So let's include our information here about this employee model. Here in the employee ID, we are including some good informations about ID. For example, we are using the unique identifier to help around to the indexing our tables. So let's include some good informations around to this application. For example, name, job role, salary, employee registration, created at, and updated at. Fine, we finished to include our model, but we have to include our connection string that we created inside in the Azure portal, but also the shadow database. So in this case, let's include here the shadow database URL and our environment, and that's it. Inside in the environment, I already created my environment, so I will include in my connection strings here, and okay, now our model is already done. It's a time to use one of the Prisma key concepts, which is the Prisma Migrate. So in this case, let's come back to the commander here, and let's use the command npx Prisma Migrate dev. Let's include a name here. In this case, I'll include as first or even second because I already created it before this migration. So let's include as second. And done. If you will return to the code, inside in the Prisma folder, we will see another folder called Migrations. Inside in this migration folder, we will see another migration called Second. Inside in the second migration, we will see a migration.sql file. And boom, we will see our table created as an employee. Now it's time to see if this information is recurring. So let's create our code here around to the create a new employee. Before this, let's go back to the create employee folder and the function.json file. And let's make a few changes here. For example, change the methods. Let's include the route. And include a few changes here in the name property. And we finished this file function.json. Let's focus in the index.js file. So let's come back here to the create employee folder, open the index.js file. Let's remove this bunch of code here. Let's call the files inside in the shared folder, which is the arrow.js file and the Prisma.js file. Well done. Right now it's time to create our create employee logic inside in the Azure Functions. So let's use the try catch here and let's call all the informations inside in the employee model, which is the job role, salary, employee registration, and all the things related with employee model. Let's create some validations here. We need to see if this employee already exists. So let's create a variable to see if this employee already exists in the database. So let's create here this logic. So to see if this employee already exists inside in the database, you're going to use the Prisma Client in the model, and we'll use the property find unique. So let's use where, and then we are going to use the property the field employee registration. So in this case, let's use the parseInt employee registration. Now let's see if this employee already have some value inside in the database. So let's include some if command here. Here we are going to validating some informations here. So now it's time to create this new employee. So now if that exists, so right now we are going to create this new employee. So right now, let's create a new variable here called employee. And again, using the property, the Prisma Client property called create. If everything is fine, so let's return status to 201. Fine. Right now it's time to handle some errors messages around to the database. If something get wrong, we have to return any error message. So in this case, let's validate in this catch part of the code here. And we finished. Right now it's time to test this Azure Functions we recently created. So in this case, let's open our prompt command, going first to the client and run the client firstly. Now let's run the Azure Functions. In this case, inside in the package.json file, we can see that I created a command. Let's see here, npm run dev. So let's use this command here. Now we can see that we have here the new function that we created recently here, integrated with Azure SQL and Prisma. So let's come back to the browser in the localhost 8080 because it's the default port for Vue.js applications. So here, let's include some information here. For in this case, I included my name here, Glaucia Lemos, a job role here as a cloud advocate, a salary 3,000, and employee registration here. So let's click on the button plus employee. Okay, we will not list because we not created yet the get employees. So let's go back to the Azure portal. If we run this query command inside in the Azure portal, we will see the recent value that we created is already here in the Azure portal. And that's it. Pretty easier to use Azure SQL integrated with Azure Functions and Azure SQL with Prisma. Again, if you want to see this whole application already deployed using Azure Static Web Apps, you can using this repository here. There's a lot of good information around how to use Azure SQL with Prisma, Vue.js, Azure Functions, and even Azure Static Web Apps. There's a lot of good information, and the whole CRUD application created in this project. So there's a lot of good information here. So let's go back to the final in this talk presentation right now. So here you will find the main resources if you want to know a little bit more about Prisma and Azure SQL. For example, here we have Azure SQL official documentation, some Microsoft Learn courses about Azure SQL for free. We also have Prisma official documentations, and also especially the GitHub repository to save the whole structure code created. Every week on the official Microsoft developers YouTube channel, we have a show called Data Exposed, where you will know all the news related to Azure data. Here, if you want to know more about Azure SQL, we have an Azure SQL for Beginners course, where you will learn everything related to Azure SQL. So if you want to know a little bit more, there's a link here that you access after this talk presentation. So if you want keep in touch with me, please let's connect. I'm on several social medias, especially on Twitter, and making some live coding on Twitch. So if you want to know more updates about some updates about technology and keep in touch with me, please follow me on Twitter, and below has a link to the GitHub repository with the demos and some important resources and links. And thank you so much for watching this talk presentation. Take care of yourself and see you all in the next conference. Bye bye.